We're going to start. I'd just like for you to tell us what happened to you at the Open University and what action are you now taking?
Well, it started fairly shortly after I arrived. I was made very aware that my views were not suitable to be expressed within the department and in the context in which I worked. And it all led to a head. There were all sorts of things that happened along a 3 or 4 year time period. But it all led to a head when myself and John Pike and a few other colleagues opened the Gender Critical Research Network at the Open University. And at that point, it was just like big, huge red targets all over us, not just on our back, everywhere on us. And we got engulfed in what can only be described as an absolute storm of harassment.
And you've had it very bad. I mean, you've been diagnosed with PTSD and all sorts of horrible things have happened to you. And did the university just not protect you from any of this?
No, at the point they didn't. I had submitted a grievance. The grievance, by the time I left in December, so this was like 6 months after I'd submitted the grievance, the university hadn't come to its conclusion, and they couldn't even give me a date by which they would come to a conclusion. So it wasn't that they did nothing. They did nothing. If you follow what I mean, do you know what I mean? It's like I pled with them. Quite frankly, I pled because the thing that there was a whole thing going on within my, within the unit that I worked in. But that public storm that was taking down my name, far and wide and straight across the university. So for me, it was really important for the university to do something about the public letters, the Twitter stuff that was going on from my own colleagues.
Can you give me a sense, Joe, of what sort of things were happening to you? I mean, and also what it was that you had said that caused such animosity?
Right. What I said that caused animosity was precisely nothing. Quite literally, because I was silenced. That was the whole point. But what I had done, which is something slightly different, was that I had signed the two now infamous letters that Kathleen Stock penned, one to The Guardian, one to The Times. I had spoken for WP UK, and at that point, that group was called a hate group by some of my colleagues. Of course, we know that that group is there to defend women's rights, particularly sex-based rights. And I was cancelled unlawfully at Essex. So that was used as proof that I was indeed transphobic. And then I set up a gender critical research network and called it Gender Critical.
I see.
And that was my crimes,
so again,
basically.
It's one of these many examples of you never having said or done anything transphobic or hateful, but being accused of it nonetheless, and the accusation is taken as the proof.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. Now, of course, I had talked, in the corridors, and people knew that I had a particular view about transgender prisoner placement policy. And that view is bred of, a lifetime of doing work around women and violence. So, there we go. That's what had happened. Now, for me, can we talk about this freedom of speech bill? And
yes,
I just
please.
want to loop it a little bit to what's actually happening to me now. So
yes.
As you know, as your listeners know, it's out there in the public domain. I've been cancelled not once, but twice, right? Once unlawfully from Essex, they've apologized. And once not just cancelled, but harassed and discriminated against. And I'm now embroiled in an employment tribunal. As we all know. And it's a very, very costly affair for me to take the Open University to an employment tribunal. We have something like nearly 50 questions with lots of sub-questions that the tribunal needs to address itself to. And they're basically like, did all of these facts happen? These things that I claim happen, did they happen? If they did, were they tantamount to harassment? If they weren't harassment or were they tantamount to direct discrimination? And if all of that happened, did this actually create an atmosphere of indirect sex discrimination, given that more women are likely to have gender critical views? And then, was I victimized because the one thing that I didn't mention was the grievance procedure was dropped more or less the week that I resigned from the Open University. So was I victimized because...
Would the new government bill intended to defend the right of speakers on campus, had it been inaugurated before all of this, would it have helped you?
No. No, it wouldn't have helped me with ethics at all. I mean, it might have. So I was never a fan of this free speech bill, okay? Because to me, what the government did was completely fudge something. They created a complaints procedure by a regulator to try and strengthen the spine of universities, right? But in what planet do we think that a compliance-based regulator can deal with infringements of human rights?
Yeah, but now they're watering the bill down. They're saying, you know, unless every possible avenue is exhausted, then no one can take legal action. So this is actually quite serious. I mean, they've implemented a bill, but then they're taking the teeth out of it.
Yeah, 100%. So that, you know, now what situation I would be in if it happened now, well, after the bill is passed, if it happened, then I'd have to actually go through that complaints procedure before I could even get to the employment tribunal. But here's the other thing: you have to show your losses at the compliance process rather than in a court. And I know from the experience that I've had that trying to establish that, you actually need judges to hear this stuff, because the law is both clear, but it also must be implemented. And the compliance complaints procedure of the Office for Students hasn't got that expertise. It won't be able to do this. So in my mind, you know, the bill was always problematic, but taking the ability for us to go to court away from us has just made it horrendous. I mean, I'm not glad I was harassed, but I'm glad I was harassed when I was and not next year.
And of course, it's so important that people like yourself and Kathleen Stock are drawing attention to what is actually happening, because it's endemic, isn't it? I mean, that's the problem. It's everywhere.
Yeah, it is. And, you know, there's some really interesting, sad stuff that's been coming out over the course of the last year. There are all sorts of minor cancellations that nobody hears about and can't be collected by the Office for Students. So those research grants that get, you know, canned at the ethics level. I've heard now of 2 researchers and 1 PhD student who, following the publication of some of their research, activists have made complaints about ethics. Right. Now that's going to drag the academics down, and all it does, and when I say drag it down, you get, you know, the punishment is the process, the process is the punishment, and then all you end up with in the end of this is academics going, oh, this is way too dodgy. I'm not even going to speak about it because I don't want to become a controversial speaker and appear on somebody else's risk all the time.
Thank you so much for coming on to talk to us about this. Just quickly before you go, how can people support you in terms of, well, raising money for this tribunal?
Yeah, I'm a long way away. We've got another few more months, 11 more months. I've got 11 more legal bills. We are spending money because we have to do disclosures, all of that. If people could go to Crowd Justice and Google Professor Phoenix, they'll find my case. Any donations, literally any donations, make a huge difference, even if it's just £1.